The corridor felt longer than usual. Or maybe Arindra was just more aware of every step, every sound, every second that passed after hearing something she couldn't unhear. She didn't go back to her room immediately. Didn't run. Didn't rush. Because rushing meant reacting. And reacting meant breaking. She wouldn't do that here. Not where anyone could see. Instead, she walked with the same measured pace she always had, calm, quiet, controlled, until the war room doors were far behind her. Only then did she stop. Just for a moment. Just long enough to breathe. Inside that room, decisions were still being made. About territories. About war. About people. About her. She's becoming a liability. The words replayed, sharp and precise. Arindra closed her eyes briefly. A liability, not a person. Not someone worth protecting. Something to be managed, removed. And Kilrick. He hadn't argued. I'll handle it. She exhaled slowly. At any other time, she might have questioned it. Might have searched for a different meaning. A hidden intention. But not now. Now she understood the pattern clearly. He never explained. Never reassured. Never corrected what others assumed about her. Because he didn't need to. Because they were right. Her place had always been uncertain. Unclaimed. Temporary. And now, unnecessary. Arindra opened her eyes. The decision came quietly. Not out of fear. Not out of panic. But out of clarity. She wouldn't wait for him to handle it. Wouldn't stand in front of him and ask what she already knew. Wouldn't give him the chance to dismiss her directly. Dignity didn't come from being chosen. It came from knowing when to leave. So she turned. This time with purpose. Her steps didn't slow. Didn't hesitate. Because once the decision was made, there was nothing left to question. Her room was exactly as she had left it. Neat. Minimal. Temporary. A faint, humorless thought crossed her mind. At least that part had always been accurate. She set the documents down on the table. Looked around once. Not searching. Not lingering. Just acknowledging. There wasn't much to take. She had never allowed herself to gather things. Never rooted herself deeply enough to make leaving difficult. Maybe some part of her had always known this day would come. That she didn't belong here permanently. That whatever this was, would end. She moved quietly. Efficiently. Taking only what mattered. Leaving behind what didn't. Which, in the end, was most of it. Her hand paused briefly on the edge of the table. Just for a second. Then withdrew. No hesitation. No second thoughts. Because staying now would only mean waiting to be removed. And she refused to be something that needed to be dealt with. By the time the War Council ended, Arindra Vale would already be gone. Not chased. Not dismissed. Not erased by someone else's decision. But by her own. Arindra hadn't always been close to him. That was the part people misunderstood. They saw where she stood now, just behind his right shoulder, within reach of his voice, trusted with documents and silence, and assumed she had always belonged there. She hadn't. The first time she entered Kilrick Thorne's territory, she hadn't even been meant to stay. Brought in under guarded escort, unnamed and unclaimed, she was supposed to be processed, questioned, and either placed or removed. That was how it worked. Outsiders didn't linger. They didn't settle. They certainly didn't remain near the Alpha King. And yet, she had. Not because she fought for it. Not because she demanded anything. But because Kilrick had looked at her once, longer than necessary, and said nothing. And somehow, That silence had changed everything. He didn't assign her to the lower ranks like the others expected, didn't dismiss her, didn't question her presence again. He simply allowed it. At first, it had been small, standing at the edges of meetings, carrying documents no one else bothered with, listening without being acknowledged, invisible but not removed. Then slowly, closer, a question directed at her instead of someone else, a glance that lingered half a second too long, trust given without explanation. The court noticed. Of course they did. They always noticed shifts in power. She's temporary, they whispered. A convenience. Something he hasn't dealt with yet. Arindra heard all of it. She never responded, because responding meant claiming something. And she had learned early, you don't claim what isn't yours. So she stayed quiet, did her work, kept her distance, even when he didn't. But distance blurred when it was only one-sided, because Kilrick didn't treat her like the others. He didn't ignore her, didn't reduce her, didn't make her feel like she needed to prove her place. And somewhere in between those small, quiet allowances, something shifted. Not loudly, not recklessly, but enough. Enough that she stopped questioning why she was still there. Enough that she stopped preparing to leave. Enough that she began to believe. Maybe she wasn't temporary. Maybe she wasn't just passing through his world. Maybe the space he allowed her to exist in meant something. That was her mistake. Because Kilrick never said it did. Never promised. Never explained. He gave her proximity, not meaning. And she had filled in the silence herself. Now, standing alone in the corridor far from the war room, Arindra let out a slow breath. The memory didn't hurt the way the words had. It settled, sharpened, clarified. Because when she looked back now, every moment made sense. Not as something growing, but as something unfinished, unclaimed, unimportant. Exactly what he said it was. Temporary. Arindra lowered her gaze briefly, then lifted it again. Steady. Because this time, she understood the truth before it could break her further. And that meant one thing. She wouldn't make the same mistake again. The corridor felt longer than usual. Or maybe Arindra was just more aware of every step, every sound, every second that passed after hearing something she couldn't unhear. She didn't go back to her room immediately. Didn't run. Didn't rush. Because rushing meant reacting. And reacting meant breaking. She wouldn't do that here. Not where anyone could see. Instead, she walked with the same measured pace she always had, calm, quiet, controlled, until the war room doors were far behind her. Only then did she stop. Just for a moment. Just long enough to breathe. Inside that room, decisions were still being made. About territories. About war. About people. About her. She's becoming a liability. The words replayed, sharp and precise. Arindra closed her eyes briefly. A liability, not a person. Not someone worth protecting. Something to be managed, removed. And Kilrick. He hadn't argued. I'll handle it. She exhaled slowly. At any other time, she might have questioned it. Might have searched for a different meaning. A hidden intention. But not now. Now she understood the pattern clearly. He never explained. Never reassured. Never corrected what others assumed about her. Because he didn't need to. Because they were right. Her place had always been uncertain. Unclaimed. Temporary. And now, unnecessary. Arindra opened her eyes. The decision came quietly. Not out of fear. not out of panic, but out of clarity. She wouldn't wait for him to handle it, wouldn't stand in front of him and ask what she already knew, wouldn't give him the chance to dismiss her directly. Dignity didn't come from being chosen. It came from knowing when to leave. So she turned, this time with purpose. Her steps didn't slow, didn't hesitate, because once the decision was made, there was nothing left to question. Her room was exactly as she had left it. Neat, minimal, temporary. A faint, humorless thought crossed her mind. At least that part had always been accurate. She set the documents down on the table, looked around once, not searching, not lingering, just acknowledging. There wasn't much to take. She had never allowed herself to gather things, never rooted herself deeply enough to make leaving difficult. Maybe some part of her had always known this day would come, that she didn't belong here permanently, that whatever this was would end. She moved quietly, efficiently, taking only what mattered, leaving behind what didn't, which, in the end, was most of it. Her hand paused briefly on the edge of the table, just for a second, then withdrew. No hesitation, no second thoughts, because staying now would only mean waiting to be removed, and she refused to be something that needed to be dealt with. By the time the War Council ended, Erindra Vale would already be gone. Not chased, not dismissed, not erased by someone else's decision, but by her own. Night fell without ceremony. No announcement, no shift in the air, just darkness settling over the territory like it always did, unnoticed. Erindra preferred it that way. The halls were quieter now. Fewer guards, fewer eyes, fewer chances to be stopped and asked questions she had no intention of answering. She moved through the palace like she always had. Silent, unremarkable, easily overlooked. Only this time, she wasn't passing through. She was leaving. Her steps didn't echo. Her breathing stayed even. Nothing about her betrayed what this was. Not escape, not desperation, just absence beginning. At the final corridor before the outer gates, she slowed. Not from doubt, from awareness. This was the last point she could turn back without consequence. The last moment where nothing had truly changed yet. Behind her, stone walls, structured silence, a life that had never fully been hers. Ahead, uncertainty, distance, no guarantees. Erindra didn't look back, because there was nothing behind her that hadn't already let her go. The guards at the outer gate barely glanced at her. Why would they? She wasn't important enough to question, not important enough to track, not important enough to stop. The realization didn't sting this time. It settled, confirmed everything she already knew. She passed through without a word. No challenge, no hesitation, no one marking the moment she stepped beyond the boundary. And just like that, she was no longer part of his world. The air outside felt different, colder, whiter, real. Erindra paused only once she was far enough from the gates that turning back would require intention, not impulse. Her hand reached into the fold of her sleeve. Careful, deliberate. She pulled out a small object. Simple, unadorned, but unmistakable. The only thing she had kept that connected directly to him. Not a gift. Not something given with meaning. Just something he had once left behind without thought. And she had kept, for no reason she could justify. Erindra stared at it for a moment, then exhaled, and set it down on the low stone ledge beside the path. No ceremony, no emotion, just release. Because whatever she had thought it meant, it didn't. Not to him. And that was enough. She stepped back, turned, and walked away. Behind her, the object remained exactly where she left it, unnoticed, unclaimed, like everything else she had been within those walls. By the time the war room doors finally opened, by the time voices spilled into the corridors again, by the time someone thought to call her name, there would be no answer, no presence, no trace of the quiet figure who had stood too close to power without ever belonging to it. Only absence, sharp, unexplainable, and growing louder with every passing moment. Kilrick knew something was wrong before anyone spoke. It wasn't obvious. Nothing in the war room had changed, maps still spread across the table, commanders still arguing strategy, decisions still being made with precision and control. Everything was as it should be, except something wasn't where it was supposed to be. He didn't notice it immediately, not as a thought, as a feeling, subtle, persistent, wronged. His gaze shifted once brief, instinctive, toward the space just behind his right side. Empty. The realization didn't fully form. Not yet. Should be dealt with then? One of the commanders asked, pulling his attention back. Kilrick didn't answer right away. Not because he was considering the question. Because something about it didn't sit right anymore. I said I'll handle it, he replied finally. The words sounded the same. Calm. Controlled. But something underneath them had shifted. The meeting ended shortly after. Chairs moved. Voices lowered. Orders were given. Routine. Efficient. Normal. Kilrick stepped out into the corridor without pause. His eyes moved once. Left. Right. Then stilled. She should have been here. The thought came fully this time. Clear. Unavoidable. Erindra was always there when meetings ended. Not waiting. Not hovering. Just present. Ready before being called. Aware without being told. No. Nothing. A guard passed by. Bowed. Continued. Kilrick didn't acknowledge it. Where is she? The question came out sharper than intended. The nearest attendant hesitated. Your Majesty? Erindra. A pause. Cute long. I haven't seen her since earlier. Earlier. Kilrick's gaze hardened slightly. Earlier when? Another pause. The kind that meant uncertainty. Near the war room corridor. Silence followed. Not empty. Heavy. Because something about that answer settled into place too quickly. Too cleanly. Like a piece fitting where it shouldn't. Kilrick turned without another word. His steps were faster now. Not rushed. But no longer unhurried. The corridor outside the war room was empty. Nothing out of place. Nothing disturbed. Except a single document, slightly misaligned on the floor near the wall. Barely noticeable, unless you were looking for something that didn't belong. Kilrick stepped closer, picked it up. His expression didn't change, but his grip tightened slightly. She was here. Not a question, a conclusion. Behind him, one of the younger guards spoke, hesitant. Your Majesty, I thought I saw someone earlier. Just outside the doors. Kilrick didn't turn. Why wasn't it reported? I didn't realize it mattered. Of course he didn't. Why would he? She means nothing to me. The words echoed back with sudden, brutal clarity. Not from memory. From consequence. Kilrick went still. Completely. Because in that moment, he understood. Not gradually. Not uncertainly. Immediately. She had heard him. Everything. The document in his hand lowered slowly. His gaze shifted down the empty corridor, as if expecting. What? Her presence? Her silence? The quiet way she always existed just within reach. There was nothing, only absence. Sharp, deliberate, final. Find her. The command was quiet, but it carried. Every guard in range straightened instantly. Search the palace. Every corridor. Every exit. No one questioned it. No one hesitated. They moved. Fast. Efficient. Too late. Kilrick didn't follow immediately. He stood there for a second longer. Just one. Looking at the place where she had been. And realizing, with a clarity he hadn't expected, she hadn't been waiting to be removed. She had left. They searched the palace first. Every corridor. Every chamber. Every place someone could hide if they didn't want to be found. Kilrick already knew it was pointless. Not because the guards weren't efficient. Because Arindra wasn't careless. She's not here. The report came too quickly. Kilrick didn't respond. He stood at the center of the hall as movement filled the space. Orders, footsteps, doors opening and closing. Noise. But the silence underneath it remained. Ronds. Check the outer grounds, he said. They've already begun, Your Majesty. Of course they had. Too late. Kilrick turned without warning and walked down a quieter passage. Her room. The door stood closed. Unremarkable. He opened it. Inside, nothing had changed. Simple. Ordered. Temporary. No excess. No claim of ownership. Nothing that suggested she had ever intended to stay. His gaze swept once. Bed. Table. Window. Everything in place. Two in place. No signs of struggle. No signs of haste. Only absence. Deliberate. Controlled. She left. Not a question. A fact. Kilrick stepped further inside, slower now, as if something might reveal itself if he looked long enough. It didn't, because she hadn't left anything by accident. His attention shifted to the table. A small stack of documents. Organized. Completed. Even this. Handled. His jaw tightened slightly. That wasn't what mattered. What mattered was what wasn't there. No note. No explanation. No trace of hesitation. Nothing that asked to be understood. Because she hadn't expected to be. She heard everything. The realization settled cleanly. Fully. The words returned immediately. She means nothing to me. Cold. Final. Certain. There had been no space for doubt. No room for interpretation. Only truth. Or what she believed was truth. Behind him, a guard stopped at the doorway. Your Majesty, the gates report no forced exit. Of course not. A pause. Then carefully. Do we extend the search beyond the territory? That was the real question. Inside the territory was routine. Beyond it was intent. Kilrick's gaze shifted to the window. The land beyond stretched wide. His, not hers. Not anymore. Expand the search. No hesitation. Trade routes. Border crossings. Every exit. Yes, Your Majesty. The guard left. Orders spread quickly. Efficient. Useless. Kilrick remained still. In a room that made one thing clear. Arindra hadn't needed protection from his enemies. She had needed protection from him. And now, she was gone because of it. The weeks that followed were a storm. Kilrick commanded from the war room, a man divided between duty and obsession. Every report, every messenger, every piece of news passed through him with one question in mind. Where is she? Search parties scoured villages, borderlands, and trade routes. They interrogated travelers, watched inns, and tracked every carriage leaving the capital. Nothing but silence. It was maddening, not because he couldn't find her, but because he finally understood what he had lost. Irindra Vale had been more than a clerk, more than a shadow in his halls. She had been the only constant in the chaos of ruling, quiet, precise, fearless in her calm. And he had treated her as expendable. Kilrick moved through the halls like a ghost, his usual confidence replaced by a constant edge. His commanders noticed it. The council murmured about overreach. Political alliances began to wobble under his obsession. But he didn't care. He remembered the moment clearly. Her fingers tightening around the documents, the color draining from her face when she heard the words. She means nothing to me. Words meant to protect, misjudged, misunderstood. She had left to survive, to claim her own safety. And in doing so, she had slipped from his control entirely. At night, he replayed every encounter, every silence, every glance. He remembered how she had never sought attention, yet everything about her had anchored him. Kilrick realized it was more than regret. It was recognition. He had underestimated her, and it had cost him the only person in his world who mattered without question. He tightened his fist on the edge of the map table. She will be found. Not for duty. Not for reputation. Not for the crown. And the hunt would be different now. He wouldn't simply command. He would pursue. He would track. He would tear apart every obstacle in his path until she returned, willing or not. The Alpha King's empire was vast, his reach unparalleled. But nothing had ever been this personal. Every border checked. Every messenger dispatched. Every informant pressed for news. Kilrick's life narrowed to one point, the girl who had disappeared after hearing a lie he thought would protect her. Because this time, he wasn't just an alpha. He was a man who had realized too late what mattered most, and he would not make the same mistake again.